collection and observation tour, and we have a lot of articles that I actually want to share with you. But first, we passed out a schedule. It shows like what we did in Taiwan for the 10-day trip. And in general, it has some general categories what we did, and there's also a list on that shows what does TACL do in our regular programming and some of our upcoming events in the next few months. And there's also another sheet that shows you
go through a tremendous experience for me. Going back to this time, I realized that that Taiwan really needs Taiwanese Americans like myself to dedicate our time and our career goals to promoting Taiwan's democracy. Because I was a little troubled that I having grown up in the Taiwanese community, I felt it was very important to become active. But this time around, going to Taiwan, I realized that Taiwan really needs us second-generation Taiwanese Americans to be there, to be part of the process. And part of the reason I didn't realize that earlier because of the disconnect between me having been brought up here and the emotions and feelings of the people in Taiwan. My first exposure to actual Taiwanese people in Taiwan was when I studied abroad there at a language center at Zhengzi Daxue, and there I lived there for 4 months. But before that, I had only been there for a vacation and to visit relatives. But after 4 months, I could really tell how much of impact that that the government and politics really affects such a small and tight-knit island. And I would just, what I learned from Taiwan really is that as an American, having been brought up here, is a matter of perspective. And I really feel that given Taiwan's history to this day is they had gone through a lot of hardship that I myself hadn't gone through, and just to realize the importance of that, I think I would just like to encourage other Taiwanese Americans to become active, not just looking at sides, whether it's towards independence or reunification, but more in terms of what's in the best interests of Taiwan. Not to pick sides based on history or political ideas, but to really push and to make the Taiwan government progressive and to improve Taiwan's status towards becoming a model for not just China but the entire world. I think they can set a standard as a young democracy for many, many countries in Asia, and I think that they'll play a vital role in this. Yeah, so I just, yes, question. Well, growing up, I had the opportunity to speak Taiwanese with my parents, my grandparents here, and having gone to Taiwan, where a lot of the youth didn't speak Taiwanese, because I consider Taiwanese my mother language, having been brought up until I was 6 to speak only Taiwanese. And I didn't realize why exactly the youth in Taiwan, why they did not prefer to speak Taiwanese, even though they had achieved a certain age I did. But this time around, I really could understand and feel the emotion of having to be laughed at, fined in school for having to speak Taiwanese. So that's one aspect of the not being able to identify with your own culture, and I think I have kind of taken that for granted, having been brought up here in the United States.
I like to pick up on the subject.
Yes.
Myself, I don't think speaking Taiwanese is that important as an identity issue, because language, after all, is for communication purpose. Okay. And as a matter of fact, my understanding or my realization is using Taiwanese, insisting on Taiwanese, actually is creating problem in Taiwan. Okay. So yeah, you may have that kind of realization, but I'm not sure that is really that important. Okay, and I'm afraid if that persists, may cause more problem too. Okay, I myself is a Hakka. Why do I have to speak Taiwanese? No. Okay, then which language should I use? Taiwanese, Mandarin, or Hakka? There's going to be a problem there too. So in many ways, this is an integration issue too. Okay. I guess my point here is insisting on Taiwanese may not be the right way. Okay, this we have to realize. Like in the United States, what should we speak? English or something else? Spanish? Okay. You have to have a unified language for communication purpose.
Yeah, actually, I was just trying to point out from my perspective, having been brought up in a household that I could distinguish myself from other groups here in America. I think it's difficult. There's not that many Taiwanese here. And for myself, I could identify, well, why exactly am I speaking Taiwanese at home? And could make a distinction between Taiwanese culture and other Asian American culture.
I understand. I also like to make a clarification. I'm not agreeing with KMT's policy of finding people who speak Taiwanese or force them to just speak Mandarin. Yeah, that's not right either. Okay. But communication need what language, what is all people can accept. Okay, that is very important.
Well, I have a different opinion. Okay, in Taiwan, certainly the people that speak Mandarin, they dominate the other group, and that's a fact. And people being dominated has the right to speak their own language.
No one denied your right.
Whether it's Taiwanese, Holo or Hakka. So we have to realize the cause of so-called suppression is from the KMT, the Mandarin-speaking group. And don't think Mandarin is sacred. I say no, because the official, the real Chinese language are Hakka and Holo. Mandarin is actually the language of Manchu, the conqueror. So don't think that's a sacred language. So communication-wise, Mandarin is okay.
Yeah.
I would propose English, two official language, and then allow people to use their own mother tongue. Find the people that speak their own mother tongue. I think that's not acceptable, period. Yeah. And I would say that the KMT education and cultural policy, everything, very dominant, and sadly, very, very successful. People being suppressed, you, me. They didn't realize they're suppressed. They suffer. And they speak for the people that dominated you. I think that's not fair. And we have to wake up, say, no, I have the right to speak my own language. Don't buy their argument that communication is the key. Speak my own language, Mandarin. My language, Mandarin is more high class. I'm sacred. This is a good language. Okay, I tell you already, the real Chinese language is Hakka and Holo. It's not Mandarin. Mandarin is the language by Manchu, the conqueror. So don't even say that Mandarin is sacred language. That's the only language for communication. I don't agree. Mandarin plus English, that's my proposal.
Sacred or not, okay, you have to realize, okay, let's go beyond whatever happened as history or whatever the suppression or oppression you have felt. I mean, everybody agrees that wasn't right, okay, that wasn't right at all. I have to clarify that, I didn't agree with that, okay. You have to face the fact. Mandarin is the most spoken language now, and most
After you finish, I'll
communication
give you
language now,
No
okay?
problem.
Now, I mean, if you just insist on talking about how you were oppressed, how you were suppressed, it's not going to help. We have to move forward, okay? What's the best way to communicate, okay? You insist on using Taiwanese as Taiwan's official language. I'm not sure that's going to go forward.
People never say
we
that.
know we have the right. We know we got the right. We can
Okay.
speak
Let
out
me-
dialect
let me-
now.
you
Okay.
finish.
Sorry, I don't want
Can we just move forward
Yeah.
because this is TACL's meeting and we'd like to hear what.
Yeah, I
Okay, I really need to say this.
Yes.
This is very important. When Japan has control for 50 years, guess what? I know Japanese. 日本語できます。Sure. At that time, Japanese is the official language. Now they have the same argument. Hey, let's communicate. Don't use Hakka. Don't use Chinese. Don't use Chinese. We have Japanese. Yeah. So use that. That's their trick. Don't fall into their trick. Okay. And we never insist that Taiwanese will be the official language. We say Hakka just as official, as good as Holo, and as good as Mandarin. Actually, talking about real Chinese, I keep saying, they are not more sacred than Hakka or Holo. Hakka and Holo is the real Chinese, Mandarin is the Manchu. And then when Chinese people came to Taiwan, they dominated Taiwan, they said, oh, let's all use this language to communicate. That's their trick. Don't fall into their trick. I tell you already, I know Japanese people, I know Korean people, I know some Korean people. Guess what? Their 国语, they also call 国语, 国語, Japanese. Korean people also say 国語. So actually, many Chinese people here still say, 讲国语. Guess what? 国语 in this country is English, not Mandarin. Okay? You want to say Mandarin? My Mandarin is as good as anybody, as people from China. And I know more Chinese culture than they do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yang, for your points. I think that the language issue is very important for society. Yes, for communication purpose, but also part of culture. It is integral to the culture. I grew up speaking Taiwanese at home, but then when I went to school, I learned English, and I forgot my Taiwanese. Now my Taiwanese is pretty bad. So I can still understand and appreciate a lot of Taiwanese language. It's very unique. And I think that there's been a lot of progress in celebrating language as part of a culture. In Taiwan in particular, there's been no more suppression of the speech, the use of Taiwanese language or Holo language and Hakka language. There's been a lot more openness in that area. And I think that progress is something we should continue to promote. However, I think part of Fred's point was his own identity, his own sense of Taiwanese value came from his family's upbringing in speaking the language. And that was something that was completely unavailable to some of the people he met in Taiwan. That was only one example of some of the suffering that he kind of saw in his own experience during our trip. So I think there's plenty of examples in Taiwan of suffering, and it doesn't have to be like only one generation suffers. Actually, for many generations, there's probably examples of suffering that we can point to. But that's just one of the things that he was trying to use as an example. So thank you very much for your comments, but I think
Yeah, just going back to Taiwan and having heard so many stories of how the older generation in Taiwan had the hardship and difficulty to make Taiwan what it is today. I feel that there's a considerable amount of generation gap between the old generation and the new younger generation that are students in Taiwan. And my wish is just for the younger generation and the older generation to work together and transcend all those ethnic or cultural divides and just work together for what's in the best interests of Taiwan. And I think that with such a diverse types of people in Taiwan, like in the United States, what makes the United States a strong country is because of the different type of mentalities and ideas and thoughts and being able to bring different types of perspective. And like in Taiwan's situation, it shouldn't hurt them. These type of differences shouldn't hurt them, but should make Taiwan a stronger country. And I think that this is possible if people really come together with the main goal of Taiwan's best interests. But that's my final thought. Thank you.
I want to invite, I'm sorry, did you have a, okay. I wanted to invite Perry to come next, Perry Shea, who's an old-timer in TACL. But also Rob Liu came all the way up from LA to be with us today. I'm very happy to see him. And he's been serving in TACL more than he wants to admit, but we won't let him go. But anyway, I want to give Perry a chance to share some of his thoughts.
I guess it's always as sad when somebody calls you an old timer.
Okay, you can call me old timer too.
No, I'm just kidding. I think my biases have always been, of course, favoring green, and I think a lot of us are somewhat in that category. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But I think going to Taiwan was in many ways a very eye-opening experience, because what I began to appreciate is the transformation of blue. Okay, and I think that green has not changed much over the past 10, 15 years. But what's interesting is that blue has started to change and shift. And now there's, obviously there's PFP, the orange, and then there's the blue KMT. But then even within the KMT, there's the so-called localization faction. Okay, people who are much more interested in Taiwan. A lot of people who would be considered I guess Taiwanese, or Hakka or whatever where they come from. They're much more localization. They're interested in issues about Taiwan and talking about Taiwan as Taiwan, and I think that's very important, because it's not as polarized as it used to be, and it's more about an issue of philosophy, how to handle Taiwan and China's issues, slightly different approaches to that. And I think that's really nice, because it's good to have the two parties start to balance out. And I think that in some ways it's because that the blue party is trying to appeal to the people. But this is also a second point, which is this is an indication that democracy is truly working in Taiwan, and people are truly starting to vote for what they believe in, rather than voting for security and voting for minimization of change. People vote for green because they believe in what the green is looking after. But people are voting for blue because it tends to be their style, and they don't feel that blue is going to sell Taiwan out to China. Okay, and that's kind of the beauty of this democratization of Taiwan. And I think that I really enjoyed seeing that and talking to people, even from the blue camp, and seeing what their feelings were about the democracy in Taiwan. I don't know if anyone had any comments. Yeah.
According to your observation in Taiwan, before the election, after the election, how fair do you think the media is in Taiwan? And
Oh,
also the media.
The media is horrible. Yeah, the media has got a lot of work to do.
Horrible. In favor of pain blue or pain green?
Well, it tends to be polarized, but most, you either have like a, it depends on which television station you look at, or which
Let's talk about the big television, the most popular.
Like TVBS? Yeah, TVBS is
newspaper.
probably the biggest one. And TVBS tends to be a little more blue, but I think they try to be as neutral as possible. But that's my impression. Yeah, did you want to say? Okay, all right. Yeah, that was my general impression, was that TVBS, being sort of considered the most mainstream television station, has a blue bent to them, but they try to be the most neutral. And then the other television stations just fall wherever the owners happen to favor. Yeah.
I have two questions. One, how do you think these differences in terms of the way the parties are evolving has translated into domestic policy changes with regard to Taiwan? I mean, here, everyone plays up the Taiwan-China issue as central, and I think for those of us who are Taiwanese Americans, it still is a central issue, and sort of the two parts of my question are, what are the major differences between the policies in terms of how they approach domestic issues, and also, do you find that among the youth of Taiwan today that the Taiwan-China issue is not as much of an issue for them in terms of how they vote? Is it more about domestic differences, or is it still a big issue? Because I think we tend to focus on that as Taiwanese Americans, and I'm curious if you found that.
That's a slightly loaded question, but I'll answer it as best as I can. We actually had seminars that were addressing these issues, and basically the conclusion is there are minor differences in domestic policy between the blue and the green camp, but largely blue and green have very similar economic and domestic and social policies. The differences are truly based more on issues of identity and how to deal with China. Okay, and it's we cannot really talk about major economic differences like the Republicans and the Democrats here in the United States. Most of their policies and their platforms are very similar. In other regards, the major effect on economic policy would be that opening the market to China, and the arguments that the blue says if we establish better relationships with China, then we'll have better economic development. And those were the main issues I think that a lot of people focused on, who probably were more pro-blue. And the Green Party would, have a different twist to it and say that, if you open it up, then all of our businesses are all going to get moved over to China, then you have to be careful about protecting Taiwan's economic interests. So those are really the most salient issues that might pertain to economic policy, for instance. But most people say that there's really nothing that can distinguish the two parties in those regards. There was a second part of your question?
Well, just in terms of, whether the young people of Taiwan today are as concerned about the Taiwan-China issue, or whether there's other issues that have eclipsed that.
It depends on who you talk to. I think in the South, the young people tend to be very favored towards, they're very against China being bullied into it. If you're in Taipei, which a lot of people are for some reason, a little bit less concerned. And I think it comes from many reasons. Some of it is economic, and they say that we need economic stability, and that's important for a lot of people in Taipei. And so you might see a little more favoring towards blue for that reason. And the issue of identity is even present among a lot of those people. They say that they are Taiwanese, but they vote for blue because they say that we don't think that the blue is calling us something else. Blue will still support whatever we want. It's just that they tend to handle it a little bit differently, and that was the perspective that I got from them.
I have a question. In view of what happened, what evolved after 320, especially the activity staged by the blue, my question is that do you feel that those people you talked to before the election in the blue camp perhaps would change their view? And second is that your own view, what happened since then until today, did the event change your view on the blue?
Okay, that's another loaded question. I think, so it's, I can't say for sure, but it's my belief that what happened on 320 and everything that's subsequent is not completely supported by by everyone who voted blue on 320. Okay, I think that in many ways they have alienated a lot of the people who are in the middle ground, because not for political reasons, but it's just not appropriate behavior. And I think that there's a general impression that the people who are on television, who are being reported, are the extremes, the people who are actually participating in these activities. But I think that the silent people are the people who are, trying to stay out of it. Okay, silent people are the green people, and I think some of the blue people who are saying that we don't want anything to do with this. So it's hard to really call them blue, except that they probably voted blue, and they, I think that KMT is right now in a state of damage control, because they realize that their legislative elections are coming up in December, and that's going to be a real issue, because it's hurt their image a lot among the middle ground people. There was a second part to your question too?
You probably answered it. The second part is specific for your own view. Is it going to change what happened since then? Is it going to change the blue camps?
Yeah, I think that the more blue is starting to realize that they're losing support, and they're starting to change their platform. I think that it's important for them to change their platform, and I think it's important for them to gain strength, because we don't want green to over-dominate either, because if green over-dominates, then that will also lead to corruption. And I think that it's important for the two parties to maintain a good sense of balance. Yeah, that's.
From your understanding, what is your opinion about those so-called middle ground people? Who are they?
I'm sorry, we're not wanting to do this because when a couple other people want to speak, let them finish, and when you address the question.
I don't forget because I have too much on my mind. But okay, one of the things that's very important is actually the media. It is well known that the media in Taiwan is completely unobjective. Completely. And if you watch one TV station, it's like, oh, Apiang's winning, and then the next TV station is like, oh, Lian Zhan is winning. So you don't know who's really winning, unless you're there, like counting the ballots yourself. You have no idea what's really accurate. And it's well known, like, if you like so-and-so, you watch such and such TV station. If you like so-and-so, you read such and such newspaper. And so therefore your thinking will never change, because you're always reading the same thing and watching the same thing that you want to watch. One of the things that we were exposed to in Taiwan is the fact that late night TV, evening TV, is all political shows. It used to be when I was younger, going back to Taiwan, it was all variety shows, singing, dancing, and zhuge liang. It's really funny shows. But they're gone. It's all like these boring talking people, And they talk, of course, if you want to watch somebody supporting your side, you watch that show. You're not going to watch the other show, because you don't like them. You hate listening to their garbage. But one of the things that's very, very key, I think that one of the main points that Perry raised in the beginning is that I have my own personal views, and they tend to be very green because of my education, because of my profession as a lawyer, and because of my family background. However, there are people in my own family who support the KMT, and they have their reasons for doing that, but I never really understood that. And it wasn't until this trip in particular that I started to see that the demographic that supports the blue side is not all 80-year-old people from China itself. It's not all those octogenarians. There are young people who support the KMT and the PFP. There are young, intelligent, highly educated people who are, who can compete with anyone. But they still believe and support in this other political ideology. And that really opened my eyes that actually there has to be something more here. Otherwise, you can't just brainwash an entire population so well, so cleanly, so clearly, as to just produce these intelligent mind, but no political process, no actual political analysis in their mind. I just don't believe that that's possible. And so actually in this trip, I was able to also see that, number one, the demographics are surprising as to who will support either side. And number two, that so most of the domestic policies of each party are not widely debated or widely publicized. In their official campaigning, they come up with certain slogans and repeat it over and over again. But nobody really talk about those crucial domestic issues as a campaign issue. And what we see, what is filtered through the United States and through the international media is a product of that. It's very much an identity issue question. Should we go back to China? Should we cooperate with China? Should we call ourselves Taiwanese and stand up? Those are all big ideology questions that don't have much to do with policy per se, but actually do translate into policy later. And so those are big things. And actually the media, as I said before, the media in Taiwan is horrible. It's completely unreliable. But the media, the international media in English print is also terrible too. There's been some rampant mistakes by hugely read sources like CNN or Time Asia that have made gross errors in their reporting. There's also been reporting from China. Reporter in China reporting on the Taiwan issue, reporting on the Taiwanese election. They didn't even go to Taiwan when they're reporting in Beijing. I mean, that would never be acceptable in the U.S. as so-called objective media, objective journalism. But nevertheless, it's accepted there. And part of the problem is that there's no protest. There's a lot of Taiwanese overseas who know what the truth is, or who continue to read what they want to read. And they don't object that the rest of the English-speaking world, who may have never set foot in Taiwan or China, and maybe their whole lives never will go there, but they cannot have a logical discussion about the Taiwan-China issue. There are people who are not Israelites, who are not Jews, who sit around at dinner and talk about the Palestinian problem, or they talk about the oil crisis. They talk about foreign countries that have no actual direct relation to them, but because of our US policy or because of economic policies in that area, because their tax dollars go that direction for wars in those countries, they talk about it. And yet that does not happen with the Taiwan-China issue because the media is so slanted. And I think that part of the problem is that Taiwanese people are not used to being heard. They're not necessarily used to writing an objective objection to the editor of the paper and saying, this is grossly inaccurate. Please correct your paper. Please print a correction tomorrow or something. Even if your English is bad, it doesn't matter. You should still object. I mean, if you read the Wall Street Journal, if people in your office read the Wall Street Journal and they read the wrong thing, or if they go online, CNN every day, and read the wrong thing, it's no wonder that their thinking is inaccurate. Okay? So that's a really big point, that the press and the media, even the international press is also quite inaccurate. So anyway, I didn't mean to go on and on, but we do want to give all of our participants a chance to share some of their thoughts, and we can go back and revisit some of these other issues in a broader discussion for everyone. Okay, Glau?
Expecting to speak today, but I've been around the community for quite a long time. I started working with TACL in 1990, so I've been 14 years with TACL, which is the thing Victoria didn't want me to mention. I might actually mention first that Perry has been with TACL longer than me. I went on this tour, and so basically what I wanted to say is I've been with the community a long time. I think I understand most of the issues. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've been to Taiwan 2 to 6 times every single year, and I maintain relationships with my uncles and cousins, and actually quite a number of friends in Taiwan. So I've also done business in Taiwan with my former company, mostly in the tech industry. Worked on projects like the KGT move into WAP. I don't know if you know any of this technology. It's basically the wireless internet on the mobile phones. So I've been part of lots of different parts of Taiwan, and I, sort of consider myself I have a pretty good grasp of the issues there. But what I wanted to actually point out first was that this program that Enoch and Victoria and the rest of the TACL folks in Northern California was a spectacular program. Despite my own experience with the community, I actually learned a lot about Taiwan that I don't know any other experience I've ever had that would have been able to give me this kind of background. I mean, we had sessions with the Economic Planning and Development Council. We had sessions with, election statistics. An election statistics bureau, despite the particular speaker's leanings, it was very statistical analysis of the electoral situation in Taiwan, and it's quite advanced. I mean, for a democracy that is as young as Taiwan, the election statistics and the way they're tracking the democracy is very advanced, I think. And in some cases, I've been involved in politics in New York City and some parts on the East Coast, and the democracy in Taiwan is actually more advanced than what's going on the East Coast. As far as elections being fair, I mean, come on. We have Florida, and Taiwan has, this issue here of voting. So if the U.S. can have an election debate about fairness of election in Florida, we can certainly have one in Taiwan and leave it in the courts. My impression was I actually had an opportunity to go to, I was with my friend here who wanted to get some video footage of the night after the protest from the blue side in front of the presidential palace. The first thing I would just want to give some impressions of that because that left a good impression on me. I went there originally just to make sure that nothing happened, because if he went by himself and so right turned out, then he might not come back, and so we felt it was better to have two people get lost than just one. So we went there, and the first impression I had was that the crowd, we went right into the front of the crowd, and he was taking videotape. And the first impression I had was that everyone around me was talking Taiwanese, right? Which speaks to the identity issue that Mr. Yang, and I don't know your name, but the issue of, in my experience, being involved in the Taiwanese community since I was little and being part of TACL, it always been, you're Taiwanese, you speak Taiwanese, right? You speak Holo. I myself am Hakka. I never understood that language, never learned it. But I always spoke Holo as being Taiwanese, right? But then I'm here in Taiwan at a Pan-Blue rally, or actually it was really a protest. It was like semi-riot, really, because they were really passionate and they were throwing things, and they had. It was very. It made a big impression on me, and the fact that they were speaking Taiwanese just, it opened my eyes to something real. That there are people on both sides of the camp that are Taiwanese, and they're all talking about being Taiwanese. They're just talking about different things, and hopefully some of the passions die down, and they can have a real, talk about, hey, so what? The guy lost. Wait 4 years, run again. That's the way democracy works, and that's why the U.S. has a democracy where only 25% of the population vote, because people really don't care. They don't care that much. There's not that much difference between the Republicans and Democrats for most people's lives. Everyone says they're all crooks anyway, right? So, the fact that in Taiwan, the identity lines are so different. It was a revelation to me. It wasn't just everybody who wants to be Taiwanese is green, everybody who wants to be not Taiwanese and reunify is blue. There was an honest and open debate. Well, not necessarily open, but an honest debate. And there are people on both sides, in both parties. I mean, I actually ran into a green person who actually was pro-unification, right? Which is, it was somewhat daunting to me, but I was like, so why are you voting green, right? And the response was, well, my friends are all voting green. Someone mentioned, I think Jean asked a question about young people and where they lie, where they were lying as far as their politics. and whether or not they were green or blue and what the reaction was amongst them. The young people, I actually met some, courtesy of Steve, we met some young people outside of the whole, political meetings and stuff that we had arranged. And some of them were just unwilling to discuss the whole issue because they just, they were friends, but they were on one side or the other side. And if they were to discuss it, they become very passionate and, they might break up friendships. So for a lot of young people, they just didn't want to talk about it, and they were just like, okay, you go and vote your way, I'll go my way, we just won't talk about it. Which, for such a passionate election and such a passionate issue was to me like, whoa, that's a good way to deal with it, it's a way to unify friends and stuff. Okay. So the last thing I wanted to mention, my last impression, right, because I think most of the other people covered everything else, was when Jason and I walked over to the Pan Blue protest, I noticed that there was this water cannon, which, I have a lot of friends that were involved in democracy actions in Taiwan from previous years. I recognized that water cannon. And it was like, okay, so now that water cannon is being used on the other side. Well, but the impression I wanted to give you was that we walked quite a ways around, and about 3 blocks all the way around the entire protest, right? Which some reports said there were some 10,000 people. I made a preliminary count. It's like 1,000 to 2,000 people that were really there, and they were right up against the concertina wire, which is that barbed wire stuff, right? Which is about 2 blocks off from the presidential palace. And they were really, and all night long they were chanting, and all night long they were making a big noise, as big as they could with that amount of people. And there were people there around dawn time. People would come in and replace the people that were already there, because I guess people were tired after being there all night. But the biggest impression I had was that 3 blocks around there were squads of police with riot gear all around, ready, and you'd see them, and they were lined up on every street all around this protest. And the amount of restraint that they held. I mean, these guys were sitting there. The police that were there were just sitting, standing, ready all night long, and no incidents really happened. At least that night. I thought that was a great. That's really a really good indication that your democracy is going to be stable when there isn't the passion that's going to erupt into some kind of violent protest that would instigate the police to do something more. I was there. I was hoping the water cannon would get fired, but it never did. So it wasn't until a week and a half later where they actually fired the water cannon. So to me, I think I think Taiwan is in a great spot. We need to get over this little hurdle and have the passions die down, and people realize that, hey, if you lose an election, just get yourselves reorganized. If you have to rename the party so that the history doesn't bring up bad feelings for people, do that. Get some political strategists in there. 3.5 years later, you can run another election.
Thank you also for your many years of dedication. Please don't give up on us. Thank you also for your many years of dedication. Please don't give up on us. Next, I want to turn the microphone to Wendy. She also came all the way up here from LA, and she was one of my very good friends from the trip. I just love seeing her, and she always has a very positive attitude. So I asked Wendy to share some of her thoughts.
Thank you. I didn't know I was speaking. So my name is Wendy. I was actually, I hate to admit, dragged on this trip by my sister originally. My older sister, Cindy, who couldn't make it today, but she's actually very sad that she couldn't make it, heard about this trip from your website, I believe, and thought that it would be a great way for the two of us to bond and to get away for a week. And what I found to be most inspiring was, I believe, a third of the participants were college students, approximately. We're a very small group of the total 40, 35 participants, and a third of them were college students. They gave up their spring breaks to dedicate 1 week to learning about their motherland. And in all honesty, I've been out of college a few years now. I don't know if I would have been willing to do that. So so it was very, very inspiring to see the younger generations and college students so moved and so passionate about our home country. I think that's all I have to say. I want to thank everybody who made this trip possible, especially the TACL San Francisco board. It was probably one of the best trips I'll ever have in my life. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Steve,
and then we'll have two more, Shini and Jenny.
My name is Stephen Chen. I was in Taiwan for the last 7 months. I was in Hualien and Tzu-Chi, and then I heard about this tour, and they were fortunate enough to accept me, despite my late entry. I was fortunate enough to be come on this trip. Sorry, last minute. No, I really want to thank Victoria and Cindy and Irene. They really, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other people that are behind the scenes. They did a fantastic job. And I think the people who helped support this, the board who got the finances for this, is an expensive trip, obviously. Much thanks to all of you. I think the greatest impression, or I guess lasting thought that I've had, and it was something, one of the reasons I came on to this trip was the following. I was, much like Wendy, I was very impressed by the cohort of my colleagues, not only in its kind of breadth of age and professions, but just that these folks were very passionate and very thoughtful and very open to thinking about what it means to be Taiwanese and Taiwanese American. And I think that this kind of willingness to engage what that means as a younger generation is an important part. It's part of the American tradition of identity building. One of my original questions or impetus for me for coming on this trip was to kind of think about what are the challenges that we as a Taiwanese American community need to face beyond just the issue of reunification or versus independence and all these ethnic issues, but what are some of the other issues? And I think one of the big parts of this issue is self-determination. And I think as we as a second generation or 1.5 generation community get together and claim what it means to be Taiwanese American, if that means having Hakka descent or having Polo descent or being from the mainland or having some Yuanzhumin. I was in Hualien, so I got a whole nother experience of Taiwan that I don't think is very much appreciated in our communities here in the U.S., where we focus mainly on Polo and sometimes on Hakka, but we don't think about Yuanzhumin. Very much an important part, just like in our U.S. history, a neglect of the original peoples here. But I think that this question of self-determination is not only present on the issue of identity and what it means to be Taiwanese American, but also on other aspects of identity. What does it mean when you're a parent and your Taiwanese American child is gay? What does it mean when your Taiwanese American child is poor or a woman? What does it mean to be Taiwanese American? And all of these different identities. And how, as we claim Taiwanese American identity, do we incorporate these other aspects of identity? Because I think as Taiwanese Americans, we understand the issue of self-determination. When people tell us you can't be Taiwanese American, you're Chinese American, what does that mean? So I think it's great that we claim this, but I also want to, I guess, issue a challenge or put out the challenge or make explicit the challenge that we need to also think about these other aspects of our identity. And if we go blindly only on a nationalistic approach, then we miss out and we lose credibility. And I think that was the biggest thing. That was what sent me into this trip. And I think for me, being amongst these cohort of incredible people who really think about this, it was very inspiring. I work a lot of times with activists who work on social justice issues and a whole bunch of other issues that, where these identity issues are important. And I've met a bunch of Taiwanese American folks who are engaged in these social justice issues. But the difference with what I encountered on this trip with the cohort here and my Taiwanese American social justice activist friends was that there is a difference in passion. A lot of my Taiwanese American social justice activist friends are reticent or maybe not as passionate or and hesitant about claiming this aspect to be Taiwanese American for a lot of reasons. Partly some of these other issues that I bring up. That there's a sense that we as a Taiwanese American community don't deal with race issues very well, or our own homophobia, or our own class issues. And so I think for me, it'll bring back a positive pearl to these different communities and, of activists and talking to them about what this means. And I think hopefully it'll be a chance for our community here and in Taiwan to also explore these issues. In Taiwan, one of the most powerful experiences for me was not just the incredible exposure to like Peng Mingming and Dr. Ho from the KMT and all these different amazing thinkers, but it was a chance to see a nonprofit youth corps. I think it was called Vision Youth. A bunch of young people in Taiwan who expressed their love about Taiwan, not necessarily by party affiliation, by DPP or KMT or PFP, but by just being involved in nonprofits. They kind of dodged the question, kind of what in the way that Rob was saying. They didn't want.
I just got back from Taiwan yesterday. Actually, I stayed a few extra days, and I spent some time with my relatives. So I'm still a little jet lagged. Just wanted to say a few words on, my reflections on the trip. I think the highlight of the trip for me was that first day in Kaohsiung when we attended a political rally. I was really just seeing, the massive amount of people from young and old, lined up on the streets, showing their passion, their emotion. That really touched me. And the other highlight of the trip for me was the group of people that attended the trip with me, especially the group of college students, as mentioned before. Some of them who started up the Taiwanese American chapters at their schools that really inspired me. I grew up in the United States. I was born in Taiwan, actually. I came here when I was 7, so I had the background of speaking Taiwanese with my parents at home, but I was never involved with the Taiwanese American community in college or, in college or after college. So, it was a great eye-opening experience for me to meet this group of people. And towards the KMT in Taiwan, and this is only from what my parents have told me. So I don't read the Chinese newspapers here, but my parents told me that the Bay Area newspapers here are also very slanted, or there's a KMT slant with the Sijie Zibao or other newspapers, and I think that is something that we as a community can do something about. So, I don't know if anyone else wants to say a few words about it. I don't know from firsthand.
Thank you, Jenny. So I just wanted to have her share some of her thoughts on the trip too.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you to everyone for speaking. It's great to hear your impressions. Yes, I got to come on the trip, and while they were doing important things like calling all the people to make sure the seminars, I get to do things like hand out name tags and make sure you all get on the bus on time in the morning. Okay, but actually, this trip was tremendous and amazing for me personally because I hadn't been back to Taiwan for 15 years. And I was born in Taipei. My dad used to teach at Taida, and then we came here when I was 1. So when my parents were here, they were trying to learn English, so they spoke a lot of English in the home. And even though I had to go to Zhongwen Xiaxiao, I really hated it, and I didn't learn very much, right? And actually, my Taiwanese is a lot better than my Mandarin, and they're both still very bad. So I was probably the worst off linguistically of everyone on the trip. But so thank you to everyone who helped translate for me, and I appreciate that. But it was really amazing to me to see all the people who are so invested in politics, whether for the KMT, DPP, Pan Blue, Pan Green, whatever side they were on, because I don't see that here. And when we got off, the plane in Kaohsiung, it started, you'd see taxi cabs covered in green stickers driving around, and then you'd see, some guy on a blue bike traveling around. And I was like, wow, these people are so into it. It's awesome, because here, I don't know, like you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you say things about Bush or whatnot, then you're over in 5 minutes. And people don't really have long conversations, or they like to criticize this and that, but I don't think the people feel as strongly about their political party as they do in Taiwan. And especially for my ama and my gong, they had to take a bus, take a train to come back to Taipei to vote because that's where they're registered, right? And then my grandpa can barely walk, and he took this train from Lugang to come back and vote because it's so important to him. And and that's really important to me to see. I was really hoping that I would be able to better understand why my whole family is so pro, pan-green. But because in college I did a lot of Taiwanese Student Association. I was president for a couple of years of Taiwanese Student Association at Berkeley. I worked on the first West Coast ITASA. A lot of you guys worked on some East Coast or Midwest conferences. And I always had a very strong sense of Taiwanese identity, but everyone would always say, well, you don't really speak Taiwanese, and you never go back, so what really makes you Taiwanese? And I had a lot of time to think about that on this trip because when I was back, even though it was Taiwan, I hadn't been back 15 years, I don't live there, I still felt a really strong connection to the people. It was great to see all the cities, the riding the subway was a great experience for me because I've never done that before in Taipei, and I learned a lot just about Taiwanese culture, about history, about politics, the election, but I learned a lot about myself too, and how important it really is for me to say that I'm Taiwanese American, and also the kinds of things that we can do here to strengthen our Taiwanese American community and our identity. So I hope all of you guys will take up that cause with me, and thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting. I know all the participants were awesome. I enjoyed meeting everyone from across the country, and also thanks to Victoria and Enoch and everyone else on the board, and Irene and Anna and all the people here who weren't on the board but were on our committees. And thank you to all of you guys who gave us your support and your time to help make this all possible. Thank you.
Okay, running a little.
No, I shared a little bit that it brought Taiwanese American from all over the nation, all over U.S. And another thing is this is one of the programs that Victoria and I and the rest of the TACL South Pacific Board did a lot of the groundwork, but it would not happen without support of all the Taiwanese American Association, from FAPA to NATWA to TA to you name it. The entire office. We went through everybody, and I think most of the program fund came from the Taiwanese community. A lot of us funded the trip by ourselves if we could, but but I think half the people on the trip got support. So every person were able to go and experience this great experience because of something that you have contributed either financially or logistically through your contact, getting us a bus or hotel in Taiwan, that kind of stuff. And I think that this trip, I came from a little bit different perspective from the rest of the participants because Victoria and I both see the front and the back. It's tiring, but it's very rewarding. And one thing that I really learned is that I don't know what I call it, the bridge generation. I'm not first, I'm not second. I came to U.S. when I was 15. So I was educated in Taiwan and in U.S., half and half. And my Mandarin, although it has deteriorated, I was able to communicate pretty well in Taiwan. So I also served as translator for half the trip. And it's really great to interact with Taiwanese young people. And I think that was a big experience that we all had to share. And that the identity issue for us, for them, are in many ways similar. But the perspective we came with are very different. I think a lot of us came with an American perspective. We think individualistically. We think with a particular American slant on democracy or what Taiwan should be as a Taiwanese American. But the Taiwanese people have their own idea, and Taiwanese people have their own connection to the land. And for them, it's in some ways more real, and it's more day-to-day rather than sort of ideologically, we think Taiwan should be independent, Taiwan is independent. And that was really good to see, and that to know that Taiwanese people are engaged in ways that more so than young people here are engaging in American politics. It kind of puts us to shame. They go out and vote. They go out and get people to vote. They go out and harass their friends to go out to vote, both on the referendum and also in to voting for the president. So for me, that to see all that action is great. And on the other hand, I also see how much the media and still shaping Taiwanese American youth. I mean, people call us the MTV generation in the U.S., and that's true because we watch it on TV. And same thing in Taiwan, media permeates everywhere. We went to the rally, and first thing you know, there was the group of us who look like American kids in Kaohsiung. So it was all of a sudden before in 15 seconds there was 6 cameras on us, and they're like, "What are you guys doing here?" So it's very crazy that to have the kind of media attention. So they're everywhere, and there are so many TV stations, even though they report the same thing, have similar slant. It's like the same image but different commentary on the side, depends on which side you are. So it's kind of frustrating to know that a lot of the Taiwanese people, their way they think, the way they grew up, they haven't been able to make independent thoughts, that they follow a particular character, they believe in anything that either the ensign say, whatever the ensign says is always correct, or whatever audience says is always correct. And I think that given time, I hope to see a more independent, objective, way of addressing issues in Taiwan, and that's something that I see as a potential for improvement in Taiwan, and also hope in the Taiwanese people that they will continue to do that, to have dialogue. So, and last, I just want to say, every little applicant, I also first want to read everybody's application, and even before the trip has started, I kind of grew attached to some of them, and it's kind of bad because one of them couldn't make it, I get really sad. But it proved that, to show that, all that work that we did and the late hours that Victoria and I reading for is all worth it, because we had an amazing group of people, and I really miss all of them. And I'm glad to know that some can't make it today. You're only seeing about a third of us. The rest of the amazing people out there doing their things. And, what I heard at the trip is a lot of time from the sponsors, like, you guys are it, we're passing the torch, you guys gotta pick up the slack because we're about to retire. You don't want to do this anymore. I want to, retire. And one thing I say is that, don't worry about it. Go ahead and retire. I think it's okay. I think I was kind of scared when you said that. But after this trip, I have hope in the Taiwanese American community, the generation is coming up, because they're very active. They need a lot of hand-holding still, and sometimes, but it's an amazing group of people. I wish there's a chance for you to meet all of them. So thank you very much for all of your help, and we just want to know that you have done something great for Taiwan's community in helping us, the second generation, get to know Taiwan and to get involved in the community. So thank you. And last but not least, Irene.
Hi everyone, I'm Irene Chang, the treasurer of TACL, and I've met some of you already. I'll keep this short. I know everybody's hungry. I know I am. My family's always been very involved. My parents are in the Midwest, and they've always given. Just Taiwan is their country, and I'm one of those that was always like, oh my gosh, more, you do your thing, and I will do my thing. Go to college, I'm independent, right? And I must admit that being a part of this group and going on this trip, it's been a wonderfully eye-opening experience. Whether, I know some of you have kids that were just like me, and if we can reach out to them, for me, it was, it is me. I mean, I am Taiwanese too, and it's been a great experience. So I encourage all of you, if you know others that have children who are like me, we can talk to them and say, it's not just about being Taiwanese, it's about who you are. So anyway, nice and short. Thank you.